Day 3 of the 2024 Champion Showdown Chess 9LX saw the final 3 rounds of rapid Chess 960 action. It came down to the absolute last round, but after all was said and done, tournament leader Fabiano Caruana ended up clinching first place to become the 2024 Champion Showdown Chess 9LX winner. The recently crowned US champion finished with 7.5 out of 9 points, earning the clear first place prize of $37,500. Meanwhile, Hikaru Nakamura finished in close second with 7 out of 9, while Wesley So earned clear third place with 5.5. Going into the games, I'll take you folks through the key moments of the day. Starting with the first round that we had, round 7, Caruana entered the day with a half-point lead over Nakamura, and in this first game, he was black against Leinier Dominguez. Now this one ended up in a draw. As you can see, the players reached a very equal knight endgame. Caruana drew this game, allowing Nakamura to catch up to him with this win that Nakamura scored over Robson. So this came from the same round. Once again, this is Chess 960, so we have a fresh position for every single game, with the pieces getting rearranged for every round. In this one, we started with the bishops in the corner as Robson plays g3 here. Naka goes c6, c4, g6, and quickly the players reached a very complicated structure, with white installing the bishop on d5 and then playing f3 and soon e4. But quickly it seemed like Nakamura actually got the better position here, as eventually he does trade this bishop off on d5 as white castles queenside, black is castled kingside. And when white recaptures, all of a sudden we reach a structure that actually seems pretty good for black, who's ended up with a very strong bishop on this diagonal, as we have a situation with opposite sides castling. So rook e8 takes on f5, knight takes f5, and now black's position here seems very good. Queen to d7, c6, Nakamura starts to open up the position, especially around white's king. Now d5 comes in, knight takes d5, and at this point black's position is basically winning. Of course, still has to convert, as it's a very complicated situation, but b5, more pawn breaks to open up the queen side, and eventually here white's king essentially just gets too open. White has to give up the bishop, tries to bail out in the endgame, but does have to lose the exchange. So the queens come off, but black wins the exchange, pushes d3 to open up the bishop, a4 now, continuing to go after the king, rook takes f3, and Robson resigned here. So with this win, Nakamura was able to reach Fabi after round 7, as they would be tied going into the penultimate round 8. Going into round 8, Caruana would face Kasparov, and this game was quite complicated. From the opening, actually, it seemed like Caruana had a very reasonable position, but then he starts pushing his h-pawn, h4, h5, queen d8, and for some reason he goes h6 here, allowing Kasparov to essentially take over the king side with g5. So a bit of a strange mistake from Caruana, as now after g5, all of black's pieces are very strong, as black gets to play g4 soon. And this position was actually definitely trending Kasparov's way. The only thing going against Kasparov was, of course, the situation on the clock, as he was getting behind. As the game continues, white tries to defend here, shuffling the king over to the queen side, as black looks to open the king side up here with f4 and g3 breaking through. And black's position here was definitely looking very strong here. Kasparov now takes on h6. Probably should have just taken on f2 to open up the white king even further. Black would have had a huge advantage there, but queen takes h6, rook g3, now takes on f4, takes, and Caruana defends this very well, knight to e3. Queen to h2, bishop to d3, and now a huge blunder from Kasparov, rook over to f8. What he needed to do was play bishop to c6 just to quell the pressure on the c-file, not allow white to do anything with the rook. Instead, in the game after rook to f8, white can't take on c7 yet because f2 is hanging, and that would be too strong for black. But white starts with knight to f1, a backwards move hitting the queen. The queen is forced off the attack of the f2 pawn, and next white can grab the piece on c7 and have a decisive material advantage. So that's what ends up happening here. Now rook takes f2, queen to g5 from Caruana, and Kasparov resigned, as he doesn't have any real compensation for the piece, and white is ready to start collecting more material soon. So Caruana ends up winning this game while Nakamura can only draw his round against Oparin. And he definitely tried to win. They played 166 moves, ending with a rook and knight against rook endgame that was only called off by the arbiters, I believe, after the players had played this out for 75 moves with Oparin holding on. So Nakamura did everything he could to win this game, wasn't unable to, which set up a final round where Caruana would have an extra half point over Nakamura. But to make things worse, because Caruana had defeated Nakamura earlier, and the main tiebreak in the tournament is direct encounter, that means that in case of any ties, for example, if Caruana were to make a draw and Nakamura were to win the final round, Caruana would still be winning the title on tiebreak, since he did defeat Nakamura in their individual game. So in order for Nakamura to have any chance in the final round, he would have to win his last game against Sam Shankland and hope that Caruana loses his final round game against Ray Robson. Now, Nakamura did do his job. He ends up winning this game, although he was in trouble here against Shankland, who had a very, very nice position out of the opening, and at this point could have just retreated, for example, with a move like knight to c3, black might play d5, and then bishop to g2, and white would be doing quite well here with the two bishops. Black's rook on a6, not exactly well placed. Computer giving white a big, big advantage here. But Shankland goes for this tricky move, queen to f1, which at first glance looks very strong. The point is that if black trades on f1 and then tries to take the knight on b5, white will throw a knight d6 check, king c7 forced, knight e8 check, king has to go back. Of course, white could make a draw. That would definitely not be the intention. Instead, rook takes f1, white can just recapture and get this very, very nice endgame. But what Shankland overlooks is that black has queen h6 check, getting out of the tempo with another tempo. White has to deal with the check, and now black can take this piece on b5 and end up with an extra minor piece in the position. Now, it's still a little bit tricky because black's pieces are scattered, but Nakamura was able to defend against the initiative, offering the exchange to get two minor pieces against the rook. Black would anyways have a decisive advantage there. Shankland decides to keep the bishop on the board, but in any case, Naka slowly gets the knights out and keeps everything safe. And eventually he does win this one with the extra piece. And white has a couple pawns for it, but ultimately not enough compensation. And Naka shows good technique. And here after queen f5, Shankland ends up resigning. He can trade queens, but after queen takes, rook takes, he's only got actually one pawn at this point for the piece. So really nothing happening. G3 hanging as well. So Nakamura ends up winning this game, putting Caruana under pressure to at least draw this game against Robson. And this one, of course, started off in the same starting position. Once again, the bishop's here in the corner. We see f4, f5, g3, g6, and e4. And Robson's position here actually was quite decent out of the opening here after takes, bishop h7, queen side castling. Note that the rook can move through the x-ray of the bishop. At this point, white's position is quite nice, and he should be playing for either the f5 break or something like bishop to g2 or h4. The engine suggesting some insane lines with f5 takes, and then bishop takes d5, sacrificing the bishop for knight takes d5, apparently with a ton of play. This, of course, very, very complicated stuff. But what happens is rook to f3, and we get a bit of maneuvering, but this allows Caruana to get his pieces out on more comfortable squares. So eventually black starts fighting for the light squares in the position, gets the knight to f5, now h5, and soon here we do get some trades on this f5 square. And what we end up with is this kind of middle game where it seems like black has the better minor pieces, especially the better dark squared bishop, and slowly this one does turn in black's favor as he gets h4 in. Now the queens come off, bishop has to drop back, and black is able to win a pawn. So of course a draw was all that Caruana needed actually to win the tournament, but he does end up converting this endgame against Robson to win the tournament in clear first place with 7.5 out of 9 to Naka's 7. just quickly run through the final moves of this game. It was definitely actually quite a bit of a long endgame grind with Black nursing this h-pawn to victory. Ray did manage to win his extra pawn back here, but this h-pawn, of course, is way, way too strong, supported by the powerful bishop. Now c5, Black brings the king over to make sure the a-pawn doesn't run. Rook f2. Here, Ray finally decides to give up the knight for the pawn. If he could trade off all the pawns, then of course this endgame would be a draw, but Caruana shows excellent technique here not to allow White to trade off that final pawn, and this of course makes Black's life a whole lot easier in the end. So it took actually a bit more time here as Black slowly rounds up the a-pawn, and here Ray tries c4, but Black can just take this one. If the rooks get traded, then White can't approach the pawn. So rook to h4, but rook comes in, and now check. Rook comes back, king a6, and here Robson finally resigned as Black is just going to push c3 next move, and the pawn is running home. The extra piece, of course, decides. So with this game, Caruana did become the 2024 Champions Showdown Chess 9 Alex winner, clear first place ahead of the field. Of course, participating in the tournament was the legendary world champion Garry Kasparov. He ended up finishing on an even score, 4.5 out of 9, but he ended his tournament with a nice endgame win against Sevian, the defending champion from last year's tournament. This game actually was quite interesting. I'll take you folks back to the critical moment, which happened back here after knight to b4. Very, very complicated endgame with tons and tons of pieces on the board. This is the last round, so the bishops started in the corner here. And at this point, Kasparov decides to take on b4, take on c5. Black goes knight d3 check, and White sacrifices the exchange here. King c2 takes on f4, g takes f4. But White gets this fantastic knight headed to the d6 square, and it turns out that White just has really, really tremendous compensation for the exchange. So b4 takes f5, and at this point Black decides to just counter sacrifice as his position is very, very difficult after f5. If g takes f5, there's bishop to g5, so White is winning back the material here. This knight on d6, the so-called octopus knight, as Kasparov would call it, just very, very strong, completely dominating Black's position. So Sevian actually finds a very good resource here to give back the exchange and take on f5, and he does manage to defend his way to a drawn rook endgame, but this one ends up being a little bit trickier than it might appear on first glance. At this point, Black plays the move king to b7, very natural move. This ends up being a losing move. Apparently he had to play h5 in order to save the game, getting immediate counterplay with the h-pawn. But he makes one mistake with king to b7. All of a sudden e4, now White is winning here as Black is just going to be too slow with the h-pawn. King to d6, White is advancing, rook to h5. That h-pawn's not going anywhere anymore, and now e5, very simple decision by Kasparov, giving up the a-pawn but banking everything on the e-pawn in order to win this game. As the e-pawn advances forward, eventually White takes this h-pawn, and we end up in a theoretical rook endgame, but Black's pieces are not in position to defend this one, so White's e-pawn is just headed home. The game lasted a couple more moves, but eventually Sevian does resign here, and Kasparov finished with a nice win to end the tournament. Alrighty folks, that does it for the 2024 Champions Showdown Chess 9 LX. Hopefully you enjoyed following the tournament, or these recaps at least. Hope you have a great rest of your chess year, and I'll see you next time. Take care.